Hello everybody, and in this video we're going to solve for the quadratic formula. Now, we're just going to dive right in, but first let's go in with the basics. What is the quadratic formula and what does it do for you? So, the quick answers to these are for the first question, the quadratic formula is known as negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, what exactly does that do? Well, it just solves for x in an equation of the form like this: ax squared plus bx plus c. So, what we can do to solve for the quadratic formula, well, actually there are many different methods, but in this method we're going to solve by completing the square. So the first thing that you usually do when you're completing the square is divide by the leading coefficient, which is exactly what we're going to do. So dividing by the leading coefficient, we're left with x squared plus b over a x plus c over a equals 0. Now, if you want some more knowledge on how to complete the square, you can check out one of my other videos, which is about completing the square. Now, anyways, back to the problem. Now, what you do is subtract the c over a and move it over to this side. So then we're left with x squared plus b over ax plus something equals negative c over a. Now we have to add a certain value to this side right here, as you can see, and that side, such that this part becomes a perfect square. And the value that we add, the new constant that we're adding to this side, is going to be b squared over 4a squared. And you'll see why we add that later. And then this is also b squared plus 4a squared. And I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see the whole equation. From there, what we do is we can then factor out, so we can factor this into a perfect square. So this becomes x plus b over 2a squared, and that equals negative ca plus b squared over 4a squared. And then before we continue, what I'm going to do is add these two terms together. So this is equal to, and putting them under a like denominator, a similar equal denominator, we have negative 4ac over 4a squared plus b squared over 4a squared. And from here you can kind of see the quadratic formula coming, because right here when we stop here we're left with b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. And you can see a really big resemblance to the quadratic formula, because if we head back to our quadratic formula, there we see b squared minus 4ac. And it's also right here. Now we're going to fill back in the other part of our equation, x plus b over 2a squared. And then what we're going to do, which seems kind of like the obvious, is square root the whole equation. So we're left with x plus b over 2a equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So now we can kind of see this all coming together. And if you didn't see how I got that 2a right there, we square rooted 4a squared, and that's equal to 2a. Now, what we can do is subtract the b over 2a. But we forgot one last thing. Because we square rooted, this becomes a plus or minus, because it could be plus or minus. Since we know that the square root of any number, for example 81, is always equal to plus or minus the square root of that number. So we have to remember that. And now, of course, lastly, we subtract b over 2a from both sides, and we're left with negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And we're almost done, because all I have to do is combine these two terms right here, and we're done, because we have found the quadratic formula by completing the square. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we're done. Because if we go back and we check, they're exactly the same. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we did this by completing the square. Now, in another video, I'll show you how to solve any quadratic in the form this just by completing the square. And in my opinion, it's much easier than using the quadratic formula in some cases. But if you don't know how to do that, you can always just stick with the quadratic formula. Thanks for watching.